used to have this one customer where I work. This woman had some definite entertainment value because we were never quite sure what she was going to say. When she came in, she would never say hello. She would just start the conversation and she would go and go and go. When somebody got busy, she would find another employee there and just pick up where she left off. There were many nights that she would go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and after she finally left, we'd all have a good laugh. That was fine. Didn't bother us. Until she started calling me every day. And this woman would be on the phone for several hours. First, it wasn't bad. There were actually some intelligent conversations. But as time went on, even though I did set up boundaries, I don't like to be bothered in the morning, but people find their way around that, don't they? The conversations were getting so redundant. And more often than not, and just put the phone down, do my own thing, and let her go off for a while. There was one afternoon. I was off. I wasn't working this day. She called me one afternoon. Now, one thing I do not like to engage in is flat-out gossip. I'm not into gossip. I'm not a drama queen. She calls me up with some hearsay, and I questioned her on it. I says, I actually don't believe it, and I don't know where you heard it. She decides to tell me her source. Well, I heard it from so-and-so. Well, you might want to question their sources. Well, she started arguing with me. Now, my thing was, if what she was telling me was fact, it would become common knowledge somewhere down the line. Why are you insisting on telling me this now? Well, she kept going. And the thing is, I don't engage in arguments or debates too often, but she lured me right in, and I'm just combating her. And I'm trying to stay calm, but I could feel my anger getting higher and higher, so I decided hang up on her. I found out later on, because my coworkers called me about an hour later. She had gone into my place of employment, complaining that I yelled at her and hung up on her. Well, they laughed at her. And then she said, and I called 3 other guys, and they all yelled at me. Okay, you may want to think of the correlation here. You called 4 guys, and they all hung up on you. Well, as it was, apparently she thought my coworkers were going to jump to her defense, which never happened. She hasn't come in there in about 6 or 7 months. That was fine. One thing I have noticed, people that talk too much, they have little respect on your guidelines, your boundaries, your personal space. Even though you set up these boundaries, there are times of days I do not want to be bothered. When I'm in my zone, the simplest word can pull me out of my zone and distract me. So I tell people flat out, morning and late night are not the best times to talk to me. But like I said, you got people who acknowledge that, but they find their way around it. And what they do, which for the most part, on an average day, it's not bad if it's somebody you see once in a blue moon. But if it's in a situation where you can't readily get away from, like if it's somebody in the neighborhood, or if it's a coworker, or somebody close by to work that you just cannot get up and walk away, it can get to be a problem. Now, this is why I tell people flat out. Morning time is not the best time to talk to me. At night after work, I also don't like to be bothered with. But what they do, they acknowledge those guidelines that you have, but what they do is they'll walk up and pick up a conversation that you may have had a week ago. Okay, my mind is not on that subject at this point in time. And when they see that they're not getting the response that they wanted, what they'll do is they'll start throwing different things at the fan, waiting for that response. You finally give up and start talking. And that is the invitation for them to start talking away. And you find out that this is the same conversation you had last week. And they're very redundant. You've probably already had their best conversation. And the one thing that people that talk too much have in common is they don't have much going on between the ears. The other thing I like is when you're obviously doing something, you don't want to be bothered, is when they'll stand off to the side, waiting for you to acknowledge their presence. And once you go, what is it? That's the open invitation for them to sit down and start talking. And on occasion, those times where you don't acknowledge their presence, they'll eventually say something. but they always invite themselves in, and you know it's going to be a problem. This is something that's always happened, but I got a little bit more sensitive to it since I was a JW, because the Kingdom Hall, it ran rampant with that, although for slightly different reasons. Now, when I was at the Kingdom Hall, for the most part, I was very talkative. There were a lot of times I didn't want to talk. The unfortunate thing, when people see you in a certain mode, they think that's you 24/7. And they don't realize there's different parts of your personality. A lot of times I go into the Kingdom Hall and start conversing with people and blah, 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 blah. There were also times that I didn't feel like talking. At the time, I worked nights. So when I got to the meetings that next morning, all I wanted to do was go to the meeting, finish it off, and go home. So I came in this one time, and I was really tired. So I sat down, didn't say much to anybody. After the meeting, I was just going to grab my stuff and go, not really say anything to anybody. I looked over. I could see this one JW, made eye contact, and he's coming over. And I'm like, okay, no. I grabbed my stuff. And while he's fighting his way around the crowd, I snuck out the door and drove off. It's like, I just need to sleep. Didn't want to have to explain that because this guy could talk Christ off the cross. Anyways, I finally got home, and I just laid on the couch. I had to work that night, so I definitely wanted to get sleep. What do I hear? Oh, God. And I knew who it was. So, stupid me, I opened up the door. And he says, hey, you left the meeting. I wanted to talk to you. And I'm like, dude, I'm really tired. I really don't want to talk now. Oh? What's the problem? No problem. I'm just very tired. I really don't want to talk. See, now, with a JW, they automatically assume that when you don't want to talk, they have a problem. And they'll keep digging and digging. Well, you're looking angry. Well, I'm starting to get that way. I just don't want to talk right now. Well, okay. Well, we'll talk later then. Okay, fine. Well, I finally laid down. Phone rang a couple hours later. So, just out of habit, I picked it up. Yeah, you feel like talking now? Here I'm thinking maybe days or weeks, and he's giving me minutes and hours. And I'm like, no, dude, I don't. So I hung up the phone. So why is it that these chatterboxes dig at this? When they know they're invading your personal space, why do they do it? It's for reassurance. Now, people on the outside of the org, as opposed to people that are JWs, the assurance are different things. Now, people inside the org need to reassure themselves that you're not doing something you shouldn't. See, when you're not talking, something must be wrong. Even though they're probably doing something that's far worse than anything you could do, they have to dig out your issues so they can go and turn you in and cover their own asses. But JWs assume that when you're not talking, there is a problem. You're hiding something. People on the outside, the reassurance is a little bit different. See, if you're not talking to a chatterbox on the outside, you must be mad at them. Because there are times where you'll be sitting there, you really don't want to talk, and they'll be sitting there jibber-jabbering away. And they're like, is everything all right? Yeah, everything's fine. You know, you're not saying much. I really don't have anything to say. And they don't realize this. And you bring it up. I told you, you know, there are times I don't like talking. Well, how am I supposed to know? Well, basically, if you have to dig for conversation and have to throw different things at the fan, there probably is no conversation to be had. The unfortunate thing is you can tell them this, and they'll be fine with it at that point in time, but they'll be back the next day doing the same thing. Even though you put up those boundaries, you set up these guidelines. Look, I don't like surprise visits. I don't like conversing in the morning. When I don't want to talk, I don't want to talk. Sometimes you have to enforce those boundaries. And you know, the funny thing is, they're going to be offended. And why? To lay a guilt trip on you so that you give up and you do talk to them. See, the conversation is quite one-sided. It always goes around their realm of knowledge, which is very, very limited. And after a while, you get very frustrated with what little they actually know. They'll get offended, they may storm off, but if you set those guidelines and tell them flat out, there are times of days I do not like to talk. It's very distracting. If I'm in my zone and I'm focused on something else, your conversation is distracting me. They may get up and storm off, but they want you to feel bad. JWs are notorious for this when they lay the truth. Well, Jehovah knows what you're doing. That's nice, but you don't need to know. So there are times you do have to enforce these boundaries and guidelines. And no matter how offended somebody may be, that just tells me that when somebody does this, they don't have a whole lot of people to talk to. Now, I'll talk to anybody, but respect my space. And if anybody's not respecting your space, you may have to enforce those guidelines and tell them flat out, regardless how offended they get. Anyways, guys, those are my thoughts on the subject. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'll talk to you soon, guys. You have a good day.